Minister, the proposal here is something that really, I think, flies in the face of most people's logic. And first of all, it's about a rainy day fund, and you know, when the public out there would hear of that, they say that's a good idea, put savings away and have something put by. However, the fact that when you actually study it and look into it, what you're talking about putting all this money away, when it can't actually be spent under the Growth and Stability Pact and EU rules and all the other physical rules that's in place, it can't actually be spent on what would normally be considered a rainy day situation. It can only be spent on shoring up the financial services sector. And, you know, the bailing out of the banks bankrupt the country. And really what we're saying now is we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again, that we won't bankrupt the country. We'll have saved up to bail out the banks the next time they go down. And what is that going to do? It's going to put a situation in place where the financial services sector are going to become as reckless again as they were in the past, because they know that they have that buffer there, that the government is going to come in and bail them out with taxpayers' money. And I just don't think that's right. And I don't think any logical person out there on the street thinks it's right either. You know, it's time that we recognise that, you know, the exceptional circumstances that happened in this country should not bring us to a situation where we repeat the same things again and again. And that seems to be what we're setting out to do. Set up a fund in place so that those guys can go mad again and we'll come in and bail them out. And what happens then? The economy keeps going down and down and down. There are thousands of people up and down the length and breadth of the country who were destroyed by the economic crash. They can't afford their houses anymore. They can't afford to pay their debts. The sheriff is writing them letters and threatening to come and evict them. And much of that is down to the greed of the banks and the fact that the country and the economy was destroyed because of what they'd done. We also have, of course, tonight a very cold night, if it's not a rainy night, for many people out there who are homeless, who haven't got a place to stay. And the effort needs to go and the funds need to go into providing homes for those people and providing a secure future for them. We also have huge problems in our health services, and particularly in our health infrastructure, getting away entirely from the situation with the nurses and all of that, just for the infrastructure, for the physical buildings that we need to put in place, cath labs in Sligo, all the various things around the country. And we're abandoning all of that and saying, no, they aren't important. What's important now is to save up so that if the banks get into trouble in a few years' time, that we have money there to bail them out. And I think it's a terrible message, Minister, for to be sending the public out there, that we're prepared to do this at this point in time. The reality is that the money can be used to remedy exceptional circumstances. And what the exceptional circumstance they're talking about is to ensure the stability of the financial services system. And that's just going back to where we were before. And that's what we need to avoid doing. We have a situation, if we just think of climate change even. The reality is that we're facing, I think, approximately 600 million a year in fines if we don't meet the 2020 agreement in regard to the carbon sequestration that we're supposed to meet. And at the same time, we're going to put $2 billion away when we're meeting fines like that we're not going to invest to develop the sectors that we need to do in order to sequestrate the carbon, in order to meet those requirements. We have huge problems all over the country with how we're going to manage all of this. And the farming sector is under huge pressure, because the pressure is coming on them in every direction. And basically what they need is they need a plan, they need development of sectors, and they need government to invest in that, to try and do something which will resolve those problems and save the country the millions which will turn into billions very quickly in fines which we'll get if we don't carry out those actions. And at the same time, we're talking about putting all this money away to bail out the banks. Regional development is another huge problem. As you know, in this city of Dublin, rents are through the roof. People can't afford to buy houses. Yet, when you come to other parts of the country, we have huge problems with rural depopulation and rural decline. You know, we need to have a government that invests in the rural economy, that invests in the areas that have the most potential, that ensures that we can develop those places, that we can get employment there, that we can get people living there again, that we can get things happening there again. And you're nodding that you agree that needs to happen. And yet, the government is saying we're going to put $2 billion away, 2,000 million, into a fund which the only stated cause that it can be used for is to bail out the financial services sector if and when they get into trouble again. And the ironic thing is that, and we've all dealt with them, I'm sure every public representative here has dealt with them. When you think of the financial services sector, the public out there, the person who got into trouble when their loan wasn't able to be paid, or when their loan ran into arrears and it was sold to a vulture fund. The bank wouldn't do a deal with a homeowner because they said that there was a moral hazard, that if they didn't or weren't forced to pay the entire amount they had borrowed, that would set a precedent which would be bad going into the future. Well, we've already set the precedent that is very bad going into the future, and we've already set a moral hazard by bailing out those self-same banks and financial institutions in the past, and now to set up a fund to bail them out again is copperfast in that moral hazard. Under the EU rules that state there at present, we can't use this money for anything else, basically, other than bailing out banks. And that is the big problem with it. I don't think anyone, any logical person in a normal functioning economy would say that it's a bad idea to put a fund in place to invest in the future when bad times would come or if a downturn came. The problem is it's not for that. It's only for the one purpose. And the other problem is that we don't have a normal functioning economy just yet. We still have large sections of the economy that are struggling. There's an awful lot of people out there who can't afford to live, who are under huge stress, who find it very, very difficult with the pressures of cost of living on them, and they find that they're overtaxed for the level of services they receive. I spoke to a woman the other evening, and she told me how her and her husband have almost 80,000 of an income coming into their house. When taxes are taken out of it, they have just less than 50. And yet, when a child was sick and they went down to A&E in the hospital, they had to get the chequebook and write out a cheque for €100. She said, what in the name of God are we paying all this tax for if we can't get any service? We go looking for it, except we pay again for it. And that's the frustration that people have. She's paying a mortgage, she's paying almost another mortgage in childcare. These are real crises, real rainy days. And I'm not talking about people who are on the dole, I'm talking about people who are working. People who are unfortunate enough to be dependent on social services or even in a worse situation. And yet government thinks it's okay to put €2,000 million into a rainy day fund and grow that to €8 billion over the next number of years in case the financial services need our help again. I think the priorities are all backwards here, Minister, and it's time to rethink this situation. I pass on to my colleague. Thank you.
Buckley.
Minister, we're here tonight to talk about the very, I suppose, strategic long name. I'm going to try and simplify it for some of the people outside of this chamber. The National Surplus Reserve Fund for Exceptional Contingencies Bill 2018 Rainy Day Fund, or as we'd call it, another bank bailout fund. This bill will see up to €2 billion transferred from the Irish Strategic Investment Fund into the Reserve Fund, and what's more worrying is £500 million transferred from tax revenue every year until 2023, totalling €4 billion by 2023. Now, they spoke about where it can be used and where it cannot be used. Well, I have it here in black and white, and it says the money can be used to basically remedy exceptional circumstances, B, to ensure the stability of the financial system, and C, to support major structural reforms. But unfortunately, those 3 points all are explicit to the banking sector. The only explicit use of the fund in this bill is to ensure the stability of the financial system and to capitalise the banks if they fall on so-called hard times. The government and Fianna Fáil advertised this idea of the Rainy Day Fund as a sensible policy to save in the good times in order to spend in the bad times. But the European fiscal rules don't allow for this. And Sinn Féin, on a Freedom of Information reply, showed that the fund cannot be used to increase general spending in health, education or jobs during a downturn, nor can it be used to protect the economy from any Brexit fallout or to mitigate for climate change. So that sets out fairly clearly whatever kind of rainy day we're going to having, these are not going to fall into the categories. So what I'm saying here tonight, Minister, is that it's not a rainy day fund, but a contingency reserve fund with explicit purpose for, again, recapitalising the banks who actually broke this country not too long ago. Again, Sinn Féin received, on the back of another Freedom of Information request from the Department of Finance, again confirming that the fund would not be used for Brexit, could not be used for general spending such as health, welfare and education. So this is the second time we've been told that you cannot use this money to invest in services in the event of a major downturn. the National Surplus Fund Bill and the setting up of the Reserve Fund for exceptional circumstances is again an attempt by Fine Gael to cut public investment and an attempt by Fianna Fáil to improve their image after they caused the crash, and set up a fund to bail out the banks once again. Again, I say this fund is not a rainy day fund, as the money stored cannot be used in hard times to support employment or stimulate the economy as a counter-cycle policy tool. It is a contingency fund for the banks and financial institutions, again in the event it's another bailout. The only shock this economy has witnessed in the past decade is a financial crash that was followed by a bailout of the banks. The evidence and options before us can only lead to the conclusion that this fund is designed to recapitalise the banks if they fail again on the so-called hard times. Sinn Féin rejects the fund, and this could see up to 8 billion of taxpayers' money given to the banks. I have a few questions, and I don't expect you to answer them tonight, Minister, but I'm going to put them on the record. If the bill did pass, and we've got to hope it won't, on the back of a number of parliamentary questions, and these are just examples, the Residential Care Capitals Plan 2016 and 2021, are these going to be affected if we are taking £500 million each year out of the Exchequer? There has to be a knock-on effect. I mean, I have Youghal Community Hospital. There's supposed to be a completion of a 38-bed unit there by 2021, 2.67 million. Is that part of the £500 million we're going to lose? Again, in Middleton, County Cork, a 50-bed new community nursing home is supposed to be completed by 2021 at a cost of 10.3 million. Nobody's saying what's going to be hurt here, because it's not rocket science. If you pump 2 billion additional money into an economy, it stimulates the whole economy. The knock-on effect. Put 2 billion into housing. Put 2 billion into health. Every time, people will be getting real jobs at real wages, paying real tax, alleviating the housing situation, alleviating the health system, and actually being afford to actually take out mortgages. I just can't understand that. And I think, forgive me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in the 2017 budget, one of the submissions from IBEC basically said, lads, there's an emergency here on housing, there's an emergency on health. Tell Europe, you're not giving them the 2 billion bailout. We need to spend it here. I mean, it's about investing in our people. My own background in the mental health services, my God, they're falling apart. We'll be here again tomorrow discussing CAMS. We've been told lies and sold pigs inside in bags that we can't see. They mentioned 84 million last year in additional funding. It wasn't 84 million, it was 35 million. You know, it's the same old spin here. And it's still about this fabulous, fancy little thing that you've cooped up called a rainy day fund. Many people have said it already. Yeah, it can be prudent to save, and plan for the future. But this isn't the plan in this future is only a future for the banks and the bailout again. And by Jesus, if we're going to stand over here and let this happen again, I have my own kids. We're all hopefully going to have grandkids. Let's do something right where we can be proud of it. Let's invest. The taxes are for investment in our own country. The banks absolutely castigated this country, broke families, sent people to the graveyard, and we're well aware of it. I mean, God almighty, you come up with some of these fantastic ideas, and what's it do? How do you sell it is beyond me. And that's why I'm trying to get the points out, to listen to people out here, outside this chamber, that listen to us and say, look, lads, this is not going to be spent on health. It's not going to be spent on education. It's not going to be spent on disability. It's not going into mental health. It's not going into rural Ireland. It's an extra tax to bail out this very same gang that have actually put you in the deepest crap and hellhole that this country has ever witnessed, I'd say, in history. Again, people mentioned about the moral hazards. This fund, this is a moral hazard, is if we back this fund. I can't understand. We'd be paying possibly, everybody paid their tax, then we paid again for the bailout. Every citizen in the country is paying back the bondholders. Now they want us to pay again, an extra additional, what will it be, 4, 6, 8 billion over a number of years. And what are they going to get for it? Absolutely nothing. Oh, they're going to get a little fund over here to say, look, lads, the next generation, they mightn't be hit as hard as you because we've a slight contingency plan here for the bank. But as for services that you're supposed to expect like your property tax was supposed to provide, you're getting very little of those. Because how are we going to cover it? We're actually taking the money off you. We're stealing it off you. It just drives me mad. The tools are already in place to ensure that in the event of banks succumbing to the old mistakes of the past, which is very polite, it is the bank and their shareholders that will have to pick up the bill and not the Irish taxpayers, and that's what it should be. The government should regulate for the banks rather than write them a cheque, again, of taxpayers' money. And instead of setting up a bank bailout fund worth over $4 billion of taxpayers' money, and it is taxpayers' money, the government should be investing in the greatest threats in our economy and the society as we face, and future-proofing our economy and investing in the public services, in public housing, in health, education. You can go on and on and on. But why are we coming in here? To collect billions of euro of hard-earned taxpayers' money, and we're going to do nothing with it. We're going to put it into a pot and let the banks mind it. It just begs belief. I started in my statement and I mentioned that $500 million will be transferred from the tax revenue every year till 2023. And again, I reiterate, nothing, if you take $500 million extra out of the economy instead of putting it in, where there's an action, there's an instant reaction. It will have devastating effect on the health system, which is crumbling at the moment. Devastating effects on the mental health service. It's crumbling. It's practically non-existent. Disability, education, housing, rural transport, broadband, planning for the future energy-wise. It's endless. The list is endless. And what really kind of, sometimes people won't be intact with reality, but the Taoiseach made a reference to today, and it was to do with the nurses and midwives strike, and he said that he didn't want to put an extra burden on the taxpayers in this country. A cost for equalisation on pay and whatever it was. But this government still sees fit to take an additional $500 million, it's not $500 million, $500 million from here on to 2023, out of our crippling services and stick it into a slush fund for the banks. It doesn't make money. As I said before, put the $2 billion in. If you put $2 billion into this economy and invest in where it's falling down, the knock-on effect again goes back to action, reaction. We start alleviating the housing problem. We get real jobs, real pay. It goes on. The knock-on effect is endless. But what you're doing is you're actually going to drain the whole system. And I'll finish with this. And it's very easy. Sinn Féin will actually reject this bill. And you shouldn't be surprised with that. But we also want to send it back to the Department of Finance and certainly send it back to the drawing board. And I think it's one of the most ill-conceived bills that I've ever spoken on inside in this House since I was elected. Go to Miel Margaret.
Thank you, Ciarán. Minister, when is it going to rain? That's the question I would have, is when is it going to rain? I represent Limerick City. I'm sure yourself, you have the same issues that come up in your constituency clinics whenever you have them. People can't access a house. I know for a fact in Limerick there's roughly 70 council houses that are boarded up, owned by the council. They don't have the funding to do them up. Minister Murphy tells me every time I ask him that funding isn't an issue, but the council staff, and I spoke to some of them again today, are stressed to the gills because they know they're under pressure from people who see their houses in their local communities boarded up, and families and members and friends of theirs will be in emergency accommodation. So if that's not a rainy day, I don't know what is a rainy day. Minister, the hospital in my constituency, University Hospital Limerick, is the most overcrowded emergency department in the state. Almost 12,000 people waited on trolleys last year. Again, I'd like to know, how would you define rain when you don't put the money into that? You haven't delivered the 96 beds, which is critically needed. Third level funding for third level institutions in the state, again, is causing a huge concern for people. I've met local universities myself, where they tell you that they're totally underfunded. Infrastructure, there is no funding properly put into the infrastructure. For instance, the Limerick to Cork roadway hasn't been delivered, hasn't been progressed as fast as is needed. We're facing into, 22 dog-sitting days now before we face the calamitous Brexit, where the UK are probably going to crash out of the Union. And we see if the heads of bills you produced last week with the policies and solutions are coming up in the business department. Nothing new in that, no actually additional stuff in that. What you've done is you recycled a bill that's been floating around since 2017. There's no new proposals in there. We have a loan for business, which most business will tell you they can't access it. So, Minister, when would you access the rainy day fund? What is for? The idea of a rainy day fund obviously is very good if it wasn't raining for so many people. And it's hard to understand why you're putting away money when we have critical situations in housing, in health. Deputy Buckley there referenced CAMHS. I have a whole list of kids who are waiting 18 months to get assessed by CAMHS, and I'll tell you that the issue is lack of funding. So, Minister, just to finish up briefly, the idea of a National Reserve Fund is a good idea if we had solved a lot of the critical problems that we have at the minute, and I don't believe we're actually anywhere near addressing those at the moment.
Thank you, Deputy President. Mr. Darcy to conclude.
Thank you, Lascian Corla. I don't think there's any place more comfortable when you three guys are sitting on the fence. Sinn Féin are sitting on the fence. It's a national pastime for Sinn Féin. You don't take your seats up in Westminster, and you abdicate. No, I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you once. You had 3 minutes. Never interrupted you once, Deputy. But you see, you're not able to take the criticism back. You have 2 years now with no government in Northern Ireland. So we are dealing with the finances of the state in a careful, prudent and coherent way. I just want to stop the lie, gentlemen, please. And I use the word lie because it is a lie that you've said. This is only about bailing out the banks. I don't think I'm unfair when I say, Deputy Buckley and Deputy Kenny, that's more or less all you said. This is about bailing out the banks. It's what you've said, nothing else. Okay, that's fine. Well, if I could put this on the record of the House, please, Lascian Corla. There's been speculation that the fund could be used only for a future bank bailout. To clarify this in relation to the fund and the drawdown, that the drawdown can only be to the Exchequer. Direct payment to any other body or organisation is neither contemplated nor permitted. Drawdown is also subject to Dáil approval, and any onward payment from the Exchequer will be subject to normal public financial procedures. So just to clarify that for you to accept that. For completeness, I would like to add that the use of the fund for a bank bailout is not forbidden. So it could be used, potentially, if there's a wild emergency at some stage in the future. But these measures could not take place without a further decision by the Dáil. So the Dáil will decide. But these measures that you're talking about at national and EU level are intended to protect against all this, in particular the banking union. The banking union is the EU bank supervision and resolution system that has been developed in the aftermath of the last financial crisis and the subsequent crisis in the Eurozone area. The banking union is intended to place the European banking sector on a more sound footing and will restore confidence in the euro area. At its core, the banking union aims to ensure that banks are robust and able to withstand any financial crisis, prevent situations where taxpayers' money is used to save failing banks and protect consumers. So the break between the state, the sovereign, funding banks is what has been worked upon for the last decade. But you, in particular Deputy Kenny and Deputy Buckley, only said that this was for the banks. It is not. Now, do you accept that, gentlemen? No, okay, that's fine. So you can ignore it. So you're ignoring it. So you're just completely ignoring what I've just said. That's fine, and you're entitled to your opinion. But again, you're in the comfort zone of sitting on the ditch, hurling sideways only on the ditch. You don't participate in Westminster, you don't participate in Northern Ireland, and you choose not to participate in government here. Hurlers on the ditch is exclusively what you are, hurlers on the ditch.